Welcome to Brain Injury Speaks, the podcast. Brought to you by Brain Injury Speaks and the Ontario Brain Injury Association. Episode 2, After the Impact, A Caregiver's Journey with Jackie.
Welcome to Brain Injury Speaks, the podcast, in affiliation with the Ontario Brain Injury Association. My name is Allison. I work at OBIA as a support service and network advocate, assisting with our Brain Injury Speaks network projects and newsletters. This podcast is aimed to exploring stories, struggles, and triumphs of individuals living with acquired brain injuries, as well as providing insights and ideas from experts, advocates, and professionals working to make a difference. Whether you're living with a brain injury or supporting someone who is, this is your podcast to find support, information, and hope. So let's dive in.
Trigger warning and disclaimers. Stories shared discuss personal experiences related to brain injury, which may be triggering for some viewers. Any views and opinions shared by guests may not reflect the views and opinions of OBIA.
Welcome back, everyone. We are incredibly excited to share episode 2 of the podcast, where today we're shining a light on a role that often goes unseen, but is absolutely essential, which is the role of the caregiver. So joining us today is Jackie, who is a caregiver for her husband, who is living with a brain injury. Well, so much of the conversation around brain injury rightfully centers on the survivor. We also recognize that healing, coping, and adapting extend far beyond just one person. The impact ripples through families, partners, and communities. And caregivers are often the heart of it all. Jackie is not only a caregiver, she is also a powerful advocate. She serves on the Brain Injury Speaks Provincial Advisory Team and sits on the board of Brain Injury Association of Peterborough, and continually works to uplift and connect with fellow caregivers in her community. Today, we are honored to learn from her lived experience and gain a deeper insight into what it really means to have a significant role in care for someone living with a brain injury, from the emotional challenges to moments of resilience and everything in between. Jackie, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Allison. And as you said, I'm a caregiver, and I've been a caregiver for my husband, Robbie, for 10 years. It was back in April of 2015. I had recently retired from a long career at Rogers, and I was exploring some consulting opportunities. What was my next phase, my next step? My husband, Robbie, was 50 years old at the time, and he was a successful personal trainer and a visual artist. We had plans to travel and split our time between our home in Toronto and our newly finished home on Rice Lake. That was exciting. And what began as an ordinary morning, Robbie headed out to train his clients, and he loved his work as a personal trainer. And before leaving, he promised he'd be home for dinner. And so that was great. I spent the day polishing my resume and reaching out to contacts. I was feeling hopeful about the future, and that was a normal day. But when dinner time passed and he still wasn't home, I started to worry. Then at around 7:30 p.m., I think it was, there was a sudden loud knock on the door. And I opened the door to find a police officer standing there. And he asked me if I knew Robbie Jewers. And all I remember saying was, "Is he alive?" He told me I needed to immediately get into his vehicle. In that moment, my world shifted. We arrived at Toronto General Hospital, and I was taken to the crisis stabilization unit. It was there that I learned that Robbie had suffered cardiac arrest and that doctors had already performed surgery to place 6 stents in his heart. And as they worked to stabilize him, he again went into cardiac arrest and required resuscitation, including defibrillation. Watching this unfold was incredibly frightening. The lack of oxygen to his brain damaged neurons in all areas of his brain. And as a result, the cognitive domains, all cognitive domains in his brain were affected. And so the doctors told me he would likely recover only slightly beyond a vegetative state and would probably have difficulty walking, talking, communicating, and probably not be able to resume a new normal life. So you can imagine hearing this left me utterly devastated. I was overwhelmed with a sense of tragedy and hopelessness. As it happens, we spent 289 days in the hospital. Robbie required extensive rehabilitation and therapy to regain the skills that he lost. Imagine teaching your husband to eat, drink, speak, read, write, along with everyday tasks that we take for granted, like, brushing your teeth or using the bathroom. He had to learn all of this over again. This was a life-changing event for both of us. So during that time, I went to the hospital every single day and served as his advocate and remained by his side throughout his recovery and rehabilitation. It was long days, 10 to 12-hour days, working closely with the doctors and the therapists and learning everything I could about his condition. I tried to take an active role in his daily care and his therapy sessions, often providing the medical team with key insights. And together we developed a comprehensive care manual for some of the best practices to address Robbie's brain injury, because every brain injury is totally different. I maintained a daily log of his physical and emotional recovery, and I guess this helped me stay focused, but it also helped me stay positive. It gave me a sense of purpose, but it also allowed me to share information with the medical team that maybe they didn't witness or that they weren't aware of. I created a large visual chart to showcase Robbie's accomplishments so everyone could see it, including Robbie. And that allowed him to celebrate in some of his progress, as I would put stars or check marks beside everything for him. So after 6 months of therapy and muscle retraining, Robbie was finally able to walk with assistance. And in time, he regained the ability to feed himself and use the bathroom somewhat independently. He was then transferred to Toronto Rehab, where he spent 3 months undergoing rehabilitation. This was to rebuild his strength and regain some independence. Of course, the goal was to help him participate in daily activities and to reach a point where I could manage his care at home, and at least to some extent. And that was, for me, scary, because I realized that I would have to now care for him at home. And the reason that I would be caring for him at home is that our options were limited in terms of care homes or where Robbie could go. You got to remember, Robbie was a 50-year-old man, and I didn't see long-term care as a viable option. So I was determined that I was going to take him home and try to manage this myself. And I have to admit it was scary. Today, contrary to the original diagnosis, Robbie is able to walk, talk, read, and write with some assistance. However, he does require 24/7 supervision due to the challenges with his memory, coordination, balance, navigation, processing, and some comprehension. He needs ongoing support or ongoing prompting to support him through his daily activities, which, demands a great deal of organization, creativity. I try to be as creative as possible, patient as I can, and I'm persistent, and it does take dedication. So establishing routines and using repetition, minimizing stress and confusion, and the most important thing is maintaining a positive atmosphere at all times. And that's challenging, but this is essential. And I try to create a meaningful environment to positively impact Robbie's sense of self-worth. So some of the things we did, I assisted him in writing a story that we published, and it was a children's story. And we sold copies to raise funds for the Brain Injury Association of Peterborough Region. And that was a real boost for him. And I hired a personal trainer so Rob could continue his weight training. And this gives him something to look forward to each day and helps him stay focused, of course, while benefiting both his body and his brain. So I try to encourage and support his desire to continue writing and painting. Despite the challenges he faces with interpretation and technique, he just needs a little bit more support in doing those activities. And I guess at the end of the day, as I embrace the challenges and rewards of caregiving, I'm reminded that my well-being directly influences the well-being of the person I care for, which is Robbie. And this makes, 10 years, marks 10 years that I have been in that role.
Call OBIA's helpline today. We're here to support survivors, caregivers, and professionals, listen and provide emotional support for anyone impacted by concussion or brain injury, make appropriate community referrals, and provide information about brain injuries. Call 1-800-263-5404.
Well, it sounds like you both have been through so much, and the strength and dedication you've shown is truly inspiring. And as you were mentioning, you created a care manual, you mentioned, and keeping a log of his recovery while in the hospital, and so much more, which is so wonderful. And I was just curious, did you have any or receive any guidance from someone to start incorporating these things, or how did you know to do these things?
So I'm going to say it was learn under fire. There was no playbook. And there really wasn't a playbook. Robbie was, at Toronto General Hospital on the cardiac floor. And so they too did an amazing job with Robbie's care, but they were accustomed to treating and looking after cardiac and stroke patients, not brain injury patients. So this was new for them as it was new for me. So yeah, learn under fire. There was no playbook. It was basically day-to-day observations and experiences, learning from empirical evidence. I asked a lot of questions, and sometimes I pushed the envelope and just tried to keep track of everything so that I would be able to ask the right questions. And again, just pushing as much as I could. I was determined that we were going to get beyond the original diagnosis of, somewhat better than vegetative. So again, I think it's just being in that position. You do what you do for the person that you care for. And, it's just a strong, I guess, story, or a strong, telling of that, what you have to do to advocate for, your loved one when they're in the hospital. And, that's the role I took I took that upon myself to just say that I would be his advocate and do whatever I could to make sure he got the best possible care that he did. And they did a fantastic job. And I'm just so glad that I was there every day to be able to help him and work with the medical team to get him to a point where he passed their expectations.
Wow, yeah, that's so wonderful. And as you mentioned that you were in the hospital for long hours of the day, and every day you were able to be there. So in what ways has Robbie's brain injury in that way, reshaped your daily life and your own personal identity?
Yeah. Well, caregiving is a 24/7 responsibility. And, upon discharge from rehab, we didn't have a lot of options. As I said, I didn't think long-term care was a viable or enriching option for Robbie. You have to understand he's a 50-year-old man at the time. So, as I said, I was determined to take him home and care for him. So it became what I did. And because of that, I had to realize that every day is going to need to be carefully organized and planned. And you've got to brace for the unexpected. You are sometimes in a state of high alert because you're just not sure with brain injury what can happen. And caring for someone with a brain injury, what I discovered requires routine, repetition and regularity. I call it my 3 R's. And however, as I said, it can be disrupted or, changed by last minute changes, mood swings, or unpredictable behaviors. So you do have to learn to adapt quickly. And I think one of the hardest parts is sometimes the triggers are often unknown for brain injury plans, and that's different again for every individual. So you can have plans that can fall apart without warning, and sometimes maybe survivors as well as their caregivers don't make the plans to avoid the challenges or the disappointment of having to cancel. And that unpredictability is stressful, and it feels like sometimes you are walking on eggshells. However, for me, staying organized gives me a sense of control. And even then, something, can unravel the day. And again, you've got to be able to learn to adapt and roll with the punches. I guess over time, I felt the shift from being a spouse to being the caregiver. And, that role can easily overshadow my identity, leaving me defined more by caregiving than who I am as a partner and perhaps as a person. And, overshadows maybe the relationship between the caregiver, me, and the survivor, Robbie. So again, challenging, and yet again, you have to realize that it's a complex situation and be able to, as I said, adapt and roll with the punches.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've touched a bit on, the challenging parts of that shift in your relationship and the role into caregiver and some of your strategies. But if you had to say, like, what has been maybe the most part, or sorry, the most challenging part of caregiving, and how have you found ways to cope and support yourself in that shift and into this new role and relationship?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the biggest things is I have lost much of my freedom, my independence, and somewhat a sense of self. Um, as caregiving dominates my daily life, my time choices, my movements, they all revolve around Robbie's needs. Can I babysit my grandchildren? Can I go see my grandchildren? Well, that all depends on how things are going with Robbie. So that does leave little space for my own hobbies and connections. And I think, that can be saddening at times. And so you try to work around that as best you can. And the other thing is, I think I grieve the future that Robbie and I imagined together. We had plans, and at times, that's sad. And as I said, at times I feel less like a partner and more like a nurse, and that's sad for me, and I'm sure that's sad for Robbie. It does affect the relationship. And the other thing is the role requires endless patience, and it comes with stress, exhaustion, and lots of sleepless nights. And I think what happens is it becomes your new norm. The body loves, the human body loves, homeostasis. So, once things become normal, then it becomes the new norm, and you just get used to it, and you try to get up every day and say, okay, today's a new day, and we're going to make the best of today. So I do. I start every day with intention. I ask for strength, patience, empathy, especially empathy and grace. And I try to focus on the present. I try to resist the what ifs and the negative thoughts. And I try to carve out those moments for myself so I can spend it with my grandchildren, or catch up with a friend, or treat myself to something simple like a manicure. And I think that's important, because if you don't do that, then, it can become very overwhelming. And I've maintained my longstanding commitment to fitness, especially getting to the gym. So when Robbie goes to the gym and works out with a personal trainer, I take advantage of that time and I work out at the gym myself. And I think that helps to keep me grounded as well and gives me a sense of accomplishment. I think most importantly, I try to remind myself that I'm doing the best I can. However, connecting with others who share this journey does validate your experience. And, you know, sometimes it's nice to hear that other people are going through some of the same challenges that you are. And it provides comfort and understanding and even moments of joy or laughter. So that's a good thing. So despite the challenges, I strive to hold on to happiness. And I have a saying that, I'd rather be on the front of the boat looking forward than on the back of the boat looking back. So each day I go forward as best I can.
Join the Brain Injury Speaks Network today. Join the network and receive the Voice newsletter, take part in impactful surveys, share your story in our Photo Voice Collective, share your thoughts, stories, and struggles, and have your voice heard. For more information, email braininjuryspeaks@obia.on.ca or call 905-641-8877 at extension 107.
And I really admire how intentional you've been with finding support and staying positive. That kind of effort makes such a difference, I imagine. And with that, what are some misconceptions about brain injury and the caregiving role that you wish more people could understand?
Well, living with brain injury has shown me how suddenly life can change. And brain injury, I've learned, is a chronic condition. And brain injury can happen in so many unexpected ways, whether it's carbon monoxide exposure, cardiac arrest, or even something as simple as hitting your head. And the effects are lasting and they touch every part of one's life: physical abilities, memory, emotions, behavior. And not only does it change the life of the person, the survivor with the brain injury, it changes the lives of their family and the caregivers too. And I was amazed when I read the stat that in Ontario there are 500,000 people living with an acquired brain injury. To me, that was just astounding. And, because brain injury is so complex, the recovery looks different for every individual. And unfortunately, the system isn't designed to support the ongoing, again, as a chronic condition and often changing demands of recovery. Many survivors would benefit from continued physiotherapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, social support, and especially mental health care. But access is limited and the costs are often overwhelming. And, there's a limited housing options out there for brain injury survivors. So I worry what will happen to Robbie if I'm no longer able to care for him. And as I mentioned, caregiving is a 24/7 responsibility, and little attention, I feel, is given to the well being of the caregivers themselves, raising that critical question, as you mentioned in your intro, Allison, of who supports the caregiver and in what form should that support be structured. I think that is key. As a caregiver, my well being directly impacts the well being of the person I support. And caregivers provide an enormous yet overlooked, I think, amount of care. And certainly it eases the burden and cost on the healthcare system. And what is missing, I feel, is a sustainable caregiver model that provides real long-term support for the many years that caregivers spend in the role. And this could include better access to education, resources, helping caregivers navigate complex systems, financial assistance, respite opportunities, or just practical coping strategies.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that kind of gap in care, not only for the survivors, but the caregivers as well. As we mentioned, that, you all play such a huge role in the care for your loved ones. And as you mentioned, it has been 10 years since Robbie sustained his injury. So, with that lived experience and the many years of experience, what advice might you give to someone just beginning their journey as a caregiver to someone with a brain injury?
Well, I have an acronym. I'm not sure it'll help or not, but I use this acronym. It's called ASK, A-S-K. And the A stands for ask for help. When someone offers support, resist the urge to say I'm okay. And that's right from the get-go. People, especially in the early stages of the brain injury recovery, people want to help because it's a tragic, it's a devastating event. So, you know, share a specific way that they can help, even if it's something small. And people genuinely want to contribute, and it makes them feel good to do so. And if you always say I'm okay, they may eventually assume that you don't need help and stop asking. And you got to remember, this is brain injury is chronic, so this is a long journey. So ask for help, take the help, and appreciate it, and it will help you get through some of those days. The S stands for seek support. I feel it's important to connect with friends or other caregivers. Talking things through is far better than keeping it bottled up or rattling around in your brain. And often these conversations reveal new insights or alternative ways to approach challenges, or sometimes it just makes you feel better to share. And keep going, move forward just one day at a time, just one day at a time. In the face of a life-changing situation like brain injury, the big picture can be overwhelming. So breaking it down into smaller, manageable steps does help to make the journey easier. Focus on today and then the next day. Try not to take it all on at once.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Jackie, for being so open and generous with your experience. What you shared is really meaningful and will definitely resonate, I think, with so many others and definitely a lot of our listeners. But thank you. And that is our time today. So again, I just want to thank you, Jackie, and thank you to our listeners who are tuning into the Brain Injury Speaks podcast, again, brought to you by the Ontario Brain Injury Association. We hope today's episode shed light on life with brain injury and inspired you to keep the conversation going. For more resources, including our voice newsletter covering various topics about brain injuries and their impacts, visit the OBIA website at obia.ca. Take care and keep speaking up.
Thank you for listening to Brain Injury Speaks, the podcast. If you would like more information about the Ontario Brain Injury Association, visit our website at www.obia.ca.